something where it's basically you can say, hey, I'm educated and therefore I'm willing to take much more risk. And basically there's no protections, go wild, you're a cowboy, but you said that you were educated and so it's your fault, if you mess up. Or you could say, hey, I'm not educated, like basically put, it's like bowling, put up the bumpers so that I make sure I don't, throw the gutter ball. What I think is a fascinating conversation is if we accelerate this and we say, okay, the problem gets solved. Eventually now every market is democratized, right? Public markets are basically already democratized. If yes, you have to get an account. Yes, you have to kind of go through some hoops. But if you are able to do that, then yes, you can participate in the market regardless of status or wealth. But the private markets, it seems like those would be the ones that would be most kind of materially impacted. How would that change the private market? Would a bunch of dumb ideas go get funded? Would just the returns get more distributed across, kind of the investor base? Like, how do you think the private market changes with the democratization of that market?
I mean, personally, I think democratization leads to more efficient markets. You have everyone able to participate. And so like the supply and demand sides of these markets become more efficient broadly. Again, I'm a free market guy. Like this is what I believe in. But when you put up regulations in front of things, that creates issues in markets. We know this. This is like basic economics. And so, if you create an environment where you allow people to invest, when they acknowledge, they understand the risks of something, but you allow them to invest in it, I don't think anything changes for the worse. Maybe some people lose their money on speculative investments and then they don't do that investment the next time because they've learned from it or they have a risk tolerance around it. But it just doesn't make sense fundamentally that like, we're not going to put that in front of a, call option on GameStop, but we are going to put it in front of a investment in their friend's restaurant startup. It doesn't make sense. And there are platforms now that are, doing this already, right? Like Fundrise allows you to invest in real estate as an asset class, which was previously only for accredited investors. AngelList, I think, is making progress on this for non-accredited investors. There's real progress being made. But the basic thing is let's open up all of these asset classes to everyone. We shouldn't live in a world where the wealthy get to invest at higher returns, get lower cost of capital overall and just accrue their wealth in an incredible way as a result of these advantages that exist. I believe we should live in a world that has an even playing field, at least from an opportunity standpoint. And that doesn't mean that everyone is going to take advantage and work as hard as they need to and go after things the way they need to become, extraordinarily wealthy. But it does give everyone the opportunity to do that. And again, back to the point of opportunity being evenly distributed, that's what the end goal should be for society, in my view.
Yeah, and those companies he mentioned, like Fundrise and AngelList and all these others that are trying to take investments that are only for accredited investors and sort of bring them to normal retail investors, however many companies there are that are doing that, however many entrepreneurs are working at those companies, and however much capital, money and other resources they're using, that is almost a waste of resources if the regulation wasn't so bad in the first place, right? So all of these talented people, all of these useful resources and so forth, they could be doing something else that's more productive, but instead they're dedicating all their time and energy and resources just to getting around silly regulations and bringing opportunities to retail investors who want them, right? If the regulation wasn't there, the retail investors would just have the opportunities. So this is an example of how excessive regulation causes a huge drain, a huge suck, a huge misallocation of resources in the economy, including human labor, right, and financial capital and other capital. It's just a complete waste. It's a complete waste on a societal level, right? Obviously, those companies are doing well, they make a profit, and the users are happy, right? They get a service they want, right? Whether they make money investing or not, that's a separate question. But the point is, they're happy having those services. So like everyone's better off, but we would all be better off. Like hundreds of millions of us would be better off if the regulations just weren't there.
Once people are educated, once the laws change, and there's kind of this democratized access, then we've got to do a good job educating people on how to be a good investor. And you've done a bunch around mental models for investors in threads on Twitter and elsewhere. Kind of talk through a little bit how you think about those mental models. Are there any favorites that you have? And kind of why are those so important to somebody who wants to be an investor?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, mental models are a fancy term that people like to use. And I've been someone that's propagated this as well, but basically it's just ways to think about the world. What ways to go think about different problems that you're encountering, and they don't need to be investing problems. You can use mental models for anything that's in your life, relationships, whatever it might be. But I think mental models are important because they allow you to simplify and solve complex problems that you're encountering. So first principles is one of my favorite mental models. You hear about it a lot, read about it a lot. No one really understands it from what I found. I wrote a thread on it that was really popular because I think a lot of people hear first principles, they say first principles, and they don't know what the hell it means. But basically, this is the idea that you need to ground things in foundational truths. So stop accepting that's just the way it's always been done, or just because. Like, if you are answering a question for someone and you find yourself frustrated and you want to react by saying because I said so, or because that's the way we do it, that's usually a sign that your foundational assumptions are not grounded in a real truth that you've proven. So like Elon Musk is the best example of this with SpaceX, and people have talked about this in the past. It was written about in his book. Rockets were really expensive, and that was a huge issue for him creating this future where you could go to Mars and create a society on Mars. And so he grounded his solution to that problem in first principles. He went and looked at what were the material costs of making a rocket, and found out that actually the individual materials to construct a rocket collectively were way less expensive than the cost of a rocket on the open market. And so he built one himself. And, fast forward 10 plus years and you have this incredible progress being made at SpaceX. Second order thinking is the other big one for me that I think about a lot. It's just this idea of thinking deeper, going beyond the first order effects of something. It's very easy to see the rock hit the pond and the first little ripple or splash that comes from it. It's much more difficult to think through, okay, what happens after that? And then what? And then what? And how does that all play out? COVID was a great example of that, and how that played into our world. The first order thinker would have seen COVID hitting and said, oh man, the country is going to shut down. I'm going to sell all of my money out of the markets. I'm going to, buy put options on the market because the markets are going to crash. The second order thinker might have thought, wow, the markets are going to crash because the economy is going to shut down. People are going to be stuck at home and have to work from home. So maybe Zoom's a good buy because people are going to be sitting on video chats all day. And here we are. But that's kind of this idea of like, think deeper, go beyond just the surface level discussion and the surface level thinking that exists, and think a bit deeper.
Yeah, I really like those examples he gave. So first principles thinking, that's a huge one. I encourage you to look it up, like Google it, read some stuff about it, look at a whole bunch of examples and try to practice it. It's so good. I mean, like, if you're not thinking that way, then man, are you even thinking? I don't know. So anyways, yeah, second order effects. Yeah, that's a big one too. That's really going to help you make decisions and sort of predict things. Another one that I like a lot is incentives, like understanding the incentives that are acting upon people and companies and so forth, especially people. And what I mean by that is I look at incentives sort of in a way that you would do a free body diagram in physics. So if you look at something, some object, and maybe it's sitting on a table or something, and you do a free body diagram, you draw the force of gravity acting down and the normal force acting up, and they're equal and opposite, and they cancel, and that's why the object sits there and doesn't accelerate or move, right? Incentives are the same way. Like I think of incentives in the same way. Like you might be an incentive going this way, an incentive going that way. Like acting on a person, like you're incentivized to, whatever, do a certain thing. Maybe you're incentivized to do something at your job, but like your moral compass is sort of incentivizing you to go a certain way, but the your boss is incentivizing you to go a different way. Yeah, right. Your paycheck is incentivizing you to go a different way. Maybe your partner, your husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, or something is incentivizing you to go a different way, and so you're sort of torn. And the question is, which way are you going to go in any given scenario? And the answer is, whichever incentive is strongest acting on you. So this is what I think about, and I think if you can understand the incentives acting on a particular person in a particular situation, you can predict what they're going to do. It's hard, right? It's very hard, and there's no way to have perfect knowledge of incentives. But if you start thinking of this way, you can sort of reverse engineer what certain incentives might be. Like you can figure out what a person's moral compass might be if you see how they act in certain situations and then work backwards to figure out, well, then what must their moral compass be if they're acting in these ways, in all these different instances. So it's certainly not easy, and you can't ever do it with 100% certainty, but it is something that's helpful to think about if for no reason other than to prove your own assumptions false, right? This is so big. It's like trying to prove yourself false, which I guess is sort of another mental model, right? Is just the idea of trying to prove yourself false, whether you're using incentives or any of these other techniques. So that's something I like to do all the time because you can't know what truth is, right? There probably is an objective truth in the universe with everything. There probably is an objective truth, and you might know the truth, but you can't know that you know the truth. Like you can't know for sure that you know the truth. And this is a question that has kept philosophers busy for ages, but that's kind of what I've reached, and I try to prove myself false whenever I can. So it's not so much a mental model as it is a mental exercise, but I think it's a really great thing to do. And I think that if we taught children this, they would make much better decisions as adults in every aspect of their life, right? Health, wealth, finances, relationships. I mean, just everything. And there was one other thing I was going to say about mental models. One other one that I would strongly encourage you to incorporate is asking yourself on a regular basis where your opinions on certain issues deviate from the status quo. And the status quo can be your group of friends, like the group of friends you hang out with the most, or your coworkers, or your political party, or whatever's on the news, or whatever's on crypto Twitter, or whatever, right? There's all these different status quos for all these different types of things. I would encourage you to step back and think to yourself, okay, where does my opinion differ from the status quo? One thing that I find is I talk to so many people about so many different issues, whether it's coronavirus or the 2020 election or Bitcoin or whatever. And if we talk for long enough, I can figure out where they get their information from. I'm like, oh, you read, the Wall Street Journal and, whatever else, because their views are the exact same. They're the exact same. And I'm like, oh, you watch, OAN, right? One America News Network, OANN, yeah, or Fox News or whatever. I'm like, you're saying exactly what is on that station, and so on. So I would encourage you to think, where do my opinions differ from the status quo? Like, where do I actively disagree with that politician or that businessman or that teacher or that podcaster or whatever? Where do I actively disagree, and why? And is it just because I heard it on some other news station, or what is it? So, yeah, a lot of mental models. And if you struggle with this, the one thing I'll say is turn off your technology, like turn off your devices, and just go in nature, sit in silence, and it gets easier and easier and easier to think over time.
How do you think people can get better at implementing mental models in their daily life, right? They can read about it. Is that the best way, just to be aware of them and therefore start to apply them? Or are there other things that you found to be valuable in terms of the implementation or the usage of mental models?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And one thing I try to do with all of my writing is at the end of it, talk about how you can actually implement it into your kind of daily life, whether it's investing or your business, whatever it might be. The first step is definitely understanding what it is. I find personally, and you should tell me if you don't, I personally find that when I've learned something new, I am prone to see it in action in the real world, whatever it might be. And so for me, when I first read about first principles, I found myself taking forever to answer every question because I was trying to ground everything in first principles. And that's not replicable, and you can't go do that the rest of your life. You'll drive yourself nuts. But it's an interesting case study of when you've learned something new, you try to go apply it. Now you've applied it a couple times, and now you know when to use it and when not to. You're starting to build this repetition around it so that you've kind of greased the wheels. And I think that that's the most powerful thing is you learn it and then try to see it, in your daily life around you a little bit. It's basically, it's no different than learning a new skill. You learn how to swing a golf club and then you want to go practice it a couple times and now you're better at swinging it, or baseball or sports, whatever it might be. It's the same way with anything mental, any decision-making frameworks. You need to put them into action in order to realize the benefits.
For sure. What lessons from sports did you learn to kind of implement as an investor? Are there specific things you took from the sports career?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, embracing failure is the number one, right? Sports by nature, baseball in particular, is a failure-driven sport. They always say as a hitter, you're great if you fail 7 out of 10 times. I was a pitcher, so it wasn't quite that bad, luckily. But you need to learn how to get up from those bad moments. And it's the most important thing. You can't just stay down. When you get knocked down in a sport, you need to, your teammates and you need to be able to pick yourself up and go after the next hitter or go after the next rep, whatever it might be. So that's number one for me, is like those failures you need to learn to embrace and even seek out. I think if you do this for a living with the podcast, but you interview 100 incredible people who have achieved amazing successes in their life, they will all, when you ask them to point to transformative moments in their life, point to failures. No one points to, oh, I won this great award and then that, was such a great moment in my life and now look where I am, I've made it. They all point to some point of disappointment. They point to some failure they had, a test they failed, a rejection they had, whatever it might be. Those moments of failure actually end up being the kind of spark behind growth. And so when you think about that, that means you really need to embrace those moments. You can't hide from failure. You can't shelter yourself from failure. And it applies to being a parent as well. I mean, you can't hide your kids and insulate them from those moments of pain, those moments of failure, because they are so transformative when you're growing up to just experience that, feel that disappointment, and let it kind of charge you for that next round of growth.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, failure is the best teacher. Right, and I love a quote by Aristotle: "Learning isn't child's play. There can be no learning without pain." And usually that pain is some form of failure. It's getting something wrong, getting a question wrong, getting an answer wrong, something like that, or trying to do something and failing, right? Even if it's in sports, like trying to kick a ball and you miss the ball, right? Like, okay, that's painful. I mean, it's embarrassing, whatever else. Maybe you fall down, and you learn something there, right? And it happens in relationships. You get rejected or whatever it is. So I mean, yeah, you gotta embrace failure. You can't avoid it. You can't run from it. I mean, it's silly to try. Failure is the best teacher. It's how you learn and grow. So lean into it and let your kids fail. And just to connect it to investing, it's like you got to be, willing to lose some amount of money, right? Whatever you're comfortable with, but start small. Start with $10, right? Lose $10. Okay, see how it feels. Learn something. Now get it right with 100. And if you still lose 100, okay, now get it right with 1,000, and so forth. And then you make your $10 back. You make your $100 back, whatever it is, and you learned in the process, right? And you've learned something that you now have the rest of your life. But just to delay it and ignore it and just put it off, forever. I mean, it's just crazy. So go fail.
What's the most important book that you've ever read?
Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, who I know, by the way, is like persona non grata within the Bitcoin community now for his recent comments. But man, that book is foundational.
Yeah, he wrote a great book about being anti-fragile. He somehow became fragile, though, I think, because he started blocking people. And,
there's an irony there.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but hey, to each their own. As long as he's happy, good for him.
Yeah, I agree. I love that book. Anti-Fragile is incredible, and Nassim Taleb has a handful of books that are just amazing. Skin in the Game and Black Swan, I think, was the first one of his that I read. He's got a lot. So yeah, he's one of my favorite authors. But for some reason on Twitter lately, for a couple major topics such as Bitcoin, it's like a whole different person. I mean, it's like someone else took over his account. Like it's bizarre. I can't wrap my head around it. But anyways, His books are incredible.
Second question is about sleep. Comes from our friends over at 8 Sleep. I sleep on their thermo-regulated bed and sleep like a baby now, but I used to be like a 6-hour sleeper. What is your sleep schedule, and do you use any products when you go to sleep, and how's that evolved over time?
Yeah, and I've actually been looking into getting an 8 Sleep bed as well. Big fan of what they're building over there, and think it's incredible, the power of the wearable side of it in the future. I don't sleep enough. I'm a morning person, so I'm up by 3:45 or 4 every single morning, regardless of what time I go to sleep. I probably get to sleep by like 9 p.m. on most nights. So I kind of have a like 80-year-old man schedule, for lack of a better way to put it. I don't really use any sleep products. When I'm training hard, I'll take like ZMA or some form of magnesium before bed. Just goes back to my baseball days from that. But no, I don't have a great sleep schedule, frankly. I need to get better about it.
What are you doing at 3:45, 4 o'clock in the morning?
It's quiet, man. That's when I get my work done. No, I normally read for an hour to start the day. So I'll read from 4 to 5, whatever I'm excited about. I try not to have, I kind of follow like the Naval rule around books. I try not to like just read something through to the finish, even if it's miserable. So I'm bouncing around different books, different articles, things I'm excited about, areas I want to learn more about. So I spend the first hour doing that. And then I normally reserve from about 5 to 7 a.m. for like, I call it deep work. Basically like whatever my big time intensive, really thought provoking task is for the day, I'll spend the first 2 hours of the morning working on that. And it's before any emails come in. It's before you have meetings. And so you're really able to focus and not have those distractions. I find it really, really helpful.
Yeah, guys, I got to agree with him on this one. It is so powerful when you wake up in the morning. If you don't check your phone or your email or anything on your computer, it's amazing. Like the clarity of mind you have and the productivity that you can experience, no matter what you're working on, even if you're just thinking, it's pretty big. So if you've never done it, I encourage you to try it. Like, don't look at your phone for like the first hour after you wake up, something like that. You'll be amazed at the difference.
Last question is more fun. Aliens, are you a believer or a non-believer?
Believer for sure, man. Come on.
Why?
I cannot believe that there is, an infinite universe out there and that other life does not exist. I'm like, again, I'm a math, I'm a probabilities guy. Like, it's just unfathomable to me to believe that. And, I have a friend out there, close friend from my childhood, who he and I talk about this all the time and share all of the articles and everything that's been coming out over the last year or so. So definitely believer on aliens.
Yeah, basically, I agree with his position there. I mean, just like it's inconceivable that we have this gigantic universe and it's just us. I mean, that's just nonsense. Not to mention all the other possibilities, but I think that argument is kind of strong enough on its own. Then there's follow-up questions like where are they and that sort of thing. So I guess for this video, I'll leave it there.
You could ask me one question to finish up. What do you got for me?
How do you do it, man? How do you manage all the different things you've got going on in your life with Bitcoin ripping 52,000 plus, whatever it's at right now? How do you manage all the different work streams, different things in your life?
I just do the best I can. Frankly, I'm not good at it, right? That's like the short answer. I miss emails. I literally missed an email the other day for a company that is super hot now, and I was pissed at myself. But I've learned over time, just shit happens, right? Like you're going to miss some stuff. And so you can either optimize for, let's say from a communication standpoint, missing nothing, but then you're not as productive, right? And so you don't actually have as much output. And so if you kind of have to come up with that balance, it's just, look, be as output productive as possible and do the best you can with the inbound. And then when it comes from kind of like how do you actually do the amount of work, it's just an efficiency thing. And I'm actually very inefficient with my time. Like, Polina's always giving me shit. She's like, dude, you're on Twitter all day long. And I'm like, yeah, but like I'm staying in the flow of things. I'm reading things. I'm seeing what's happening. Like it all kind of feeds into the various activities that I do. But I probably spend too much time on Twitter. Like I don't know what my time spent per day is, but like it's probably pretty high and it's probably too high, right? And so even with somebody who's got a pretty rigid schedule and I stay pretty efficient, I've got kind of blocks of time to do certain activities and kind of really make sure that I hit the output goals that I have. I still waste time. And so, I'm super envious of people who are able to basically just go through their day like a machine, waste zero time. But like I always joke around, like I just like to screw around on the internet. I find enjoyment in doing that, so let me do it, right? And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's a lot of interesting learnings in there for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can sort of relate to Pomp, like wasting quote unquote time on Twitter or doing anything, where you step back and look at it after the fact and you're like, man, that was such a waste, whatever I just did there. But if you get enjoyment out of it, there is some benefit. Like there's a reason that you're doing what you're doing, right? Whether it's an addiction to like social media or an addiction to like coffee or alcohol or whatever it is, there's a reason you're doing it. So if you can. You don't have to judge it, I guess. You don't have to judge yourself that harshly. But if you can figure out why you're doing it, like what the benefit is, you might be able to replace it with a different activity that gives you the same benefit. But it's just a choice. So that's something I think about all the time is like, what habits do I have and which ones do I want to keep and which ones do I want to get rid of? And, I certainly don't claim to be perfect by any means. But it is something fun to think about. All right, guys. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and my reaction to it. I would be curious to hear what you think, if you agree with or disagree, for that matter, with anything that we talked about, particularly education and finance and all that stuff. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.